How do you deal with toxic people when you just can't cut them out of your life? This is one of the hardest lessons that I've had to learn because I have a history of allowing some really toxic people into my life. And I'm not talking about people who are just flat out abusive. I'm talking about passive aggressive people, individuals who are completely selfish, full of themselves, have absolutely nothing that they can contribute as far as value in my life, but I can't just cut them off. Normally, that's what I do. I'd say, listen, I'm just not going to talk to you anymore. But sometimes you just have to deal with them. You're stuck in that relationship, whether that is being an entrepreneur, a leader, a family man, personal relationships. I've had my share, and it has been so detrimental. And I'm going to show you a technique that I've learned and have adapted over the years on how to deal with toxic people who you can't cut out of your life and you have to deal with them. So, how do you at least maintain some productivity without going absolute bonkers through the whole thing? There are people who are insufferable. There are people who are insidiously trying to undermine you. People are competitive, jealous, petty, you name it. These are toxic people that you do not need in your life, but you might have to deal with them anyway. I'm going to show you lots of pictures of gray rocks, and that's a technique that I learned. It's called gray rocking. What is gray rocking? Gray rocking is when you pretty much give the minimum amount of reaction to someone who is toxic. So you interact with them at such a boring gray rock level where you're not giving them any emotional supply, anything to react to. It is so matter of fact and so, I don't know, it's almost like incognito, innocuous. You're just boring to deal with because a lot of these individuals, they feed off of your emotional reaction, and if they can get any attention from you whatsoever, typically from a toxic point of view, then that just continues to feed that behavior. They're like vampires or sharks. They have to just keep feeding. And so what happens is you just go gray rock, and that is just be boring, but you're like a stone and you're impenetrable. How do you do this? Well, it comes down to when they interact with you, you do the minimum amount of words, minimum amount of reaction, minimum amount of responsibility, and you do what needs to be done to just move on with the conversation and the interaction. That's it. There is no explaining yourself. It is almost simple as one word answers. Okay. Now, you want to be polite because you don't want to poke them and then get retaliation. So you can say, thank you for letting me know. I will take care of it. Is there anything else that you need? Right. And if they say, well, no, how come you're like this and etc. And what is wrong with you? How come you're acting this way? Just say, actually, I think it's most productive if we just move forward. What else can I do for you? Or you can say, I think that conversation is inappropriate at this time. I do not want to have this conversation with you. And no, it's just no, not going to answer that question. So you just put up the boundary and you go matter of fact. Now, they've got a choice. They can either continue to press in and interact with you in such a way where they're just laying down more toxicity, and they're going to up the intensity and you can't react. You got a gray rocket. I compare it to the scene in Batman where the original Batman, the Michael Keaton one, where he has his Batmobile and he just goes shields and the whole like the armor goes in and then it just goes inert. That's where you just turn into this gray rock, and they can keep trying to smash themselves against you, but ultimately they're going to break themselves because you are strong. You have an outer strength and an inner peace that's going on, and you put on the shield and you don't let anything through. You completely gray rock it. And that's how I've dealt with it. before. I've had very toxic relationships where I've flown off the handle and I've reacted and allowed all the emotions to come out. You can have the emotions on the inside. You can feel insecure. You can feel shame, angry, despair, all those things, but you're not letting it come on the outside. You're dealing with it on the inside. You're regulating, hopefully, with people that you can get help from in terms of coaching you. But on the outside, you are just completely a gray rock. You do the bare minimum. Most of the time, people either get bored and they stop trying to get a rise out of you, or they have to deal with you. And it's just matter of fact, and you're conditioning them to just accept the fact that you're going to be gray rock. You're not going to give them any more than you have to. And that's it. This is what happens. Now, here's the cool thing. The more you gray rock, a lot of people feel insecure or they feel guilty for gray rocking other people, but it's a survival mechanism. If you can't cut them off, the first thing that I encourage is to go no contact, especially if you're dealing with narcissistic people, like the overt narcissists who have this grandiose sense and everybody should worship me and do what I say, or the covert narcissist who acts like a victim and takes all the power and all these things, these power dynamics. Look up the dark triad of personality traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, and you'll see the reason you have to just either cut them off or gray rock yourself if you're interacting with them. And people start to feel guilty. But what happens is an interesting thing occurs when you gray rock enough and you're aware that you're doing it and you reflect on it. Here's what happens. You take all those gray rocks and you analyze them individually, one by one, and you say, I gray rock this person. I thought about this person. Why do I have to gray rock with that person? How did it happen, etc.? And how you keep going, you're gray rocking, you're thinking it through, and then you have this final result. This is one of these Zen, Buddhist, intentional mindfulness things where you're balancing all the rocks on top of each other and you find this amazing center. And so all that gray rocking starts to come together and you find this inner peace. And yeah, it takes a little bit of finagling, finesse, and you're not sure if the whole thing's going to topple over. But once you do that, you're amazed at the balance that you're going to find, the equilibrium, the ability just to make those micro adjustments in every situation. And guess what? That pile of gray rocks doesn't have to move. And it may seem fragile on the outside, but it is centered. And wow, you know the core, the essence of what you're trying to accomplish. And you can deal with other people. People appreciate when you have this centeredness because you can stay calm in situations. You're self-regulated. You can help other people understand their own gray rocking required in their toxic relationships. And you just have this sense of peace. You ever meet those people who just everything's like falling apart and they just have this sense of peace, knowing there's something in the core, there's something on the inside that allows them to stay balanced no matter what the situation is. That's gray rocking. Let me just summarize. If you have toxic people in your life that you cannot just cut out and just go no contact with, which is always the first thing that I recommend. And toxic people, anybody who poisons the relationship, who basically is just not good for you. It's toxic. Eventually, that toxicity, you can clean that fish as much as you want, but you throw that fish back in toxic waters, it gets infected again. So every time you go back there, it's kind of like, you got a pile of manure and you have a cut on your hand and you're playing with the manure, you're having to handle manure and you get infected. Well, you can heal that, okay? And you can heal that, but if you keep going and you keep exposing yourself while you still have the open wounds, you can heal the infection. But until you close the wound, until you've gotten that scar tissue or that protective tissue over there, you're completely healed, you can't play around with that anymore. And how do you do that? Well, gray rocket. It's the equivalent of just putting on gloves or just handling it the minimum amount possible. And it's the minimum amount of reaction, minimum amount of responsibility, communication, everything like that. Just goes so boring. You should be so boring to those other people. That's gray rocking. There's my advice. Hope this has been helpful in developing your emotional intelligence as a leader, because it takes a lot of self-awareness to know that you have to gray rock, self-regulation to maintain that gray rock position. As a leader, entrepreneur, family member, a spouse, whatever situation that you're in, use this technique when you know you have to deal with toxic people, but you can't cut them out of your life. Hope this has been helpful. I'd love to hear what you think. Leave some comments and stick around. I'll see you in the next video.